All right, hey everyone, and welcome into the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. We've got the quad box here of your Horns 24/7 members, Eric Henry, Chip Brown, and Jeff Howe joining us from New Orleans. They don't want me to come to the party yet, so I'm still here in Houston, but I'll be joining them here tomorrow. Guys, thanks for joining us. We're just going to be talking some of what we've heard from media days and press conferences and practice viewings here the last couple of weeks. What stands out to you all? And then we'll close off on a fun note here ahead of the Sugar Bowl with some over-under predictions. Didn't get to the true-false segment on my mailbag episode earlier this week, so instead we're bringing you the Horns 24/7 quad box to have some fun. But we'll get to that in a moment. For now, Jeff, we're going to start with you. So we'll go to screen and bring you in here by yourself. I know, nice and fancy for you, huh?
Yeah.
Earlier this week, you wrote a piece on Quinn Ewers and how Washington is going to face a completely different quarterback than they did a year ago in the Alamo Bowl. What stood out to you from what Ewers had to say this week about his growth? And in your perspective, what's the biggest difference from 2022 Quinn Ewers to what would be 2024 technically Quinn Ewers?
I think it's twofold. I think for starters, you could tell in the bowl game last year, he was taking the short game, taking what the defense was giving him, and we didn't see Quinn do that at all last year until that Washington game. And yeah, I think when people look at his evolution, you might point to the Alabama game this year and say, okay, that was the coming of age moment. That was when everything started to click. But if you ask Quinn, he'll tell you it was in bowl prep last year where he really started to understand what Sark wants to get done on a play-by-play basis, how this offense is supposed to function, all the ins and outs, why he calls what he calls, when he calls it. So I think that really gave Quinn the foundation to have that leaping off point that we've seen him take this year. He said it without saying it. He realized that checking the ball down to a running back is not a bad play. It's not an admission of defeat. You're better off letting guys work in space, especially the kind of playmakers Texas has, rather than trying to just drive a ball into a window down the field and risk turning it over. A check down or a screen can be a really good play for this offense. I think Quinn understands that now. The Oklahoma State game in the Big 12 championship game is a perfect example of that. And the second part is talking to AJ Milby at Media Day inside the Superdome. We all talked about Quinn's footwork, and I think it shows the fans out there. Look, what we see and what we talk about, the coaches see the same things. AJ Milby said the cleaning up of Quinn's footwork, really from a mechanical standpoint, it was his feet. That really started in bowl prep last year. And he said, look, it's tough when you've got so many banked reps doing things the wrong way that you really have to break a guy down to build him back up. But AJ Milby said that's what they've done with Quinn Ewers, and I think that's why we've seen a different Quinn. So you've got a Quinn Ewers now that Washington's going to see, who has grown last year, both in terms of his under Sarkisian's offense, both in terms of being willing to take what the defense gives him, and now you throw in the fact that he plays a cleaner brand of football. The footwork has been cleaned up. You're getting a Quinn Ewers. Washington is that's much closer to his ceiling than he was at this time a year ago.
And it's certainly proven to be that way throughout this 2023 season. We'll see how he fares here on New Year's Day. Thanks for that, Jeff. Now we're going to bring in Chip. Chip, my question for you is, when you look at this game and really across the entire college football season, this could be the best showing of wide receiver play that anybody in the country has seen in a single game. You look at the Washington side of the ball, you've got Rome Odunze, you've got Jalen McMillan, you've got Jalen Polk for Texas, you have Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell. Let's focus on those two guys here for your question. How would you gauge their confidence ahead of what, maybe not for AD Mitchell, but maybe for Xavier Worthy, one of the biggest games of his career? AD Mitchell has been here before. And as far as Xavier Worthy's health, what kind of impression did you get from both talking to him and seeing him in practice when it comes to how good he'll be on Monday night?
Well, talking to him and seeing him in practice, little different. He told Molly McGrath of ESPN that he's in constant pain still with his ankle injury. Yet when we've seen him practice and, getting around, he's not showing any noticeable limp. So it's a little tricky. Sounds like we're going to have to kind of look and see how he, feels on game day, but he said he's getting better, and the Texas coaching staff is talking like he's going to be okay to play in this game. So Maybe there will be some pain medication involved, but there's no question that a healthy or as close to healthy as possible Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell are a lethal combination. We saw it against Alabama when they went to Xavier Worthy early for the deep ball touchdown, kind of peppered Worthy until Alabama adjusted its defense. Then they go to Adonai Mitchell, and then once the corners are and the pass defense is focused on the outside, here comes JT Sanders up the middle, going for over 100 yards in that game against Alabama. So, it's kind of astounding that Adonai Mitchell has a touchdown catch in each of the last 4 college football playoff games, including the go-ahead touchdown against Alabama 2 years ago in the national championship game and the game winner in last year's semifinal against Ohio State with 57 seconds left. I mean, this guy is as good as it gets on the biggest stage. And look for Texas to go after number 25, Elijah Jackson, as far as, Husky defensive backs who might be targeted in the Texas passing game. He's been the shakiest of the Washington defensive backs. So keep an eye on that. But yeah, this should be an unbelievable display of receiving talent when you consider both the receivers for the Huskies and the Longhorns.
Yeah, this could very well be a game where we look back, 5 years from now when these guys are all playing on Sundays and just realize how talented, maybe we didn't even realize just how talented this field of wide receivers was. So thank you for that, Chip. And last but certainly not least, we're bringing in the man, Eric Henry. Eric, something that you and I talked about kind of before we jumped on here was we've talked all week really about getting pressure on Michael Penix. One of the interesting suggestions that you've been harping on is maybe focusing on more of a 4-man rush as opposed to sending an all-out blitz to Penix. That's something that certainly would allow the back half of the Texas defense to maybe try and limit those Washington wide receivers. Earlier this week, Washington's offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb said one of the things he wants to accomplish is to tire out T'Vondre Sweat there in the middle. And Oklahoma was kind of able to do that in the Red River Shootout earlier this year. So the question for you is, when you talk about the defensive approach for Texas, when you've listened to everybody talk this week, when you listen to Pete Kwiatkowski, what do you see as the best solution for the Longhorns being able to slow down the machine that has been Washington's offense all season?
Well, Tommy, here's the thing. No one's going to say that pressure is a bad thing, right? In whatever form you can get pressure on Michael Penix Jr., that is obviously the objective come Monday night. But when you take a look at the advanced stats, Michael Penix this year has over 160 pass attempts in which he's been pressured, and that's over 120 in which he's been blitzed. You take a look at the numbers where he's just under pressure, ideally just from a 4-man rush, and he's completing under 40% of his passes, or excuse me, 43% of his passes, under 45% there. Whereas you take a look at when he's facing the blitz, he's a much better passer versus the blitz. Even take a look at the touchdown to interception numbers. When he's facing a blitz, he's throwing 13 touchdowns this year compared to 4 interceptions. That is the sign of a veteran, savvy, 6th-year quarterback who you're not necessarily going to phase him. And quite frankly, if you're not getting that blitz off Tommy at the right moment of the snap, Michael Penix is probably reading those blitzes, understanding where to get the ball out of his hands and get the ball, who to get the ball to out of his hands and making plays. Whereas if you can get a 4-man rush, and, Chip and I kind of talked about this on the flagship podcast. It doesn't matter if you go back and look at famous examples. It can be the Super Bowl versus the Giants and the Patriots, right? One of the things that really threw off Tom Brady, one of the best offenses in NFL history, was getting home with 4 men and allowing your secondary to be physical and play coverage the way they know how to. So in my mind, the biggest thing for Texas, now again, we can see where that comes from. Is that Barron Sorrell? Is that, a pass rush specialist like Jet Bush? Is it even an Anthony Hill somehow in a 4-man package coming with a rush? There are different ways to do it, but I think ideally for Texas, if you're going to pressure Michael Penix, you can't rely too much on the blitz. Now, to the second part of what you mentioned there, as far as Washington and maybe what their offensive game plan may be, yeah, you have to take a look at what Oklahoma did. And obviously, Washington's not a team that goes up tempo too much, right? But how many times this year have we seen teams that have faced Texas kind of take what is their base standard game plan and throw it out the window and say, hey, we've got to do something a little bit different against these guys. So when you take a look what Oklahoma did, keeping guys like Jalen Ford and Jahdae Barron on the field for the entirety of that ball game and keeping Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy playing, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 more snaps than they normally would play, that has an opportunity to reduce their effectiveness. And I think the biggest thing, and whether it's talking with Pete Kwiatkowski during his media availability earlier this week, when we asked him about the secondary struggles and allowing some of those second half comebacks via the passing game against Kansas State and TCU and Houston, he really said, hey, it wasn't too much of a secondary in terms of coverage type thing. It was, we need to just get guys on the ground. We need to tackle receivers better. Once they've got the ball in their hands, bring them down. Now, with that being said, if you go back to that game plan, that deal that Oklahoma did there, getting the ball out of their hands quickly, a veteran quarterback who's stepping up in the pocket as opposed to looking to escape the pocket this way, stepping up and finding ways to get the ball in the hands of his receivers, then you're putting the pressure on your secondary, a secondary that's already going to be down, a Derek Williams Jr. That's putting the pressure on your secondary to make plays. A safety like Jaron Thompson, who certainly is the best rated coverage safety for Texas, but not so much in the tackling regard. So all in all, I think it's going to come down to just a fundamental game plan in my mind of getting a 4-man rush on Michael Penix and forcing him to make plays in that regard, as opposed to when going to the blitz, you have such a veteran savvy quarterback who can step up in the pocket and find ways to get the ball in the hands of his playmakers.
Not really much more I can add to that. I think you hit it on the money, Eric. So all 4 of these guys did a fantastic job covering media days and availabilities throughout the week. So if you missed any of it, go ahead and head to horns247.com and read what they had to say about what the Longhorns said. A lot of attention going to Arch Manning, as we saw in that viral picture earlier today, where Quinn Ewers was kind of looking like, hey, where is everybody? But keep in mind, too, that was at the end of availability, and we've spoken to Quinn all season. Arch Manning, that was his first time he was available. All right, now let's go ahead and have some fun, guys. We're going to go with some over-unders here. I'm going to give you guys a couple of lines, and I'll participate as well, and you just tell me you think over or under in this facet of the game. And we're going to start off with Texas having over or under 175 yards rushing. I say under. I said in the true false on the board they would be over 150. I think they land right between that 150 and 175 yard spot on the ground. Fellas, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think they're right in between. I'll say under, right between 150 and 175.
I want to say over, just because when you look at the body of work for Texas this year, 7 of their games they were over 175 yards rushing. They were right at 175 against Baylor. So I want to say over, but I'm kind of more in that kind of 150 to 160 range.
Yeah, and I'll go and cap it off here again. Like Jeff said, I want to say over because I really think this run game, especially with a month to kind of prep and these running backs really finding their footing and now building on some success that they've had, that there would be an opportunity there. But just taking a look at Washington's defense, allowing about 133 yards on the ground per game. Now, of course, part of that is, why run it when you can throw it? Teams have had plenty of success through the air against Washington. But with that being said, it's just kind of hard for me to see, going on the averages of what Washington has done. And also given the fact that where I think this game plan is going to take Texas to eclipse that mark.
All right, Eric, you mentioned having success against Washington through the air. That equates into our next one, Quinn Ewers, over or under 2.5 touchdown passes in this game. I'm saying over here. I think this is going to be a game where the Longhorns attack through the air. Quinn Ewers has been on fire in away games and neutral set games and just big games in general. So I think he absolutely gets at least 3 in this game.
Yeah, I'll agree. I think it's 3 touchdown passes for Quinn Ewers.
I'm over because it's going to be a high-scoring game. And look, man, Washington doesn't have a very good red zone defense. We know Texas has struggled this year in the red zone. But I think if Texas is going to end drives with touchdowns when they get inside the 20, I don't think it's going to be lining up and running the football. I think it's Sark and Quinn Ewers utilizing the weapons on the perimeter, Worthy Mitchell. And at some point, you got to utilize Jatavian Sanders and make the most out of what's just always going to be an insanely positive matchup for Texas, because there's very few defenses in the country that can account for that guy.
Tommy, I'll go and cap it off. 2 big things for me. 1, 9 times this year have the Longhorns scoring between 30 and 40 points. They're going to put points on the board. They're going to match or be right around their 37.7 per game mark. The second thing is, how many times this year have we seen Texas score from long range? Yes, we've talked about the red zone struggles, but they haven't had any issues finding those big play touchdowns. In my mind, I have to believe that Texas will find the end zone. Quinn Ewers will find the end zone 3 times via the air. And as Jeff said, I'm looking for a big game from JT Sanders. I think somewhere on the line, a couple scores from him, I think that's in reach. Absolutely.
All right, and we'll talk now about one of Quinn Ewers' weapons, and Adonai Mitchell. We're setting the line at 0.5. So basically, anytime Adonai Mitchell touchdown reception, I'm saying absolutely yes, he gets a touchdown. This guy has played huge in the college football playoff, and he comes up big in big games, kind of just like Quinn Ewers, like we talked about. So I'm going over that half a touchdown line for Adonai Mitchell, guys.
Tommy's getting the we sound like we're just following Tommy here. Yeah, I mean, come on. You got to get this guy the touchdown so that he's 5 for 5 college football playoff games in a row with a touchdown reception. Come on. Yes, I'm going over.
Yeah, as long as Chip mentioned this earlier, as long as you're not messing with Jabbar Muhammad in that Washington secondary, you should be able to get yours. These Texas weapons should. And the thing I like about A.D. Mitchell, not only have you been able to hit him on bombs, but when you get in the red zone, even though I think the red zone fade just needs to be fired into the sun, he's a guy that you can throw that kind of that back shoulder throw towards the pylon. There are different ways you can get him the ball where he can use his savvy as a route runner, use his body to shield himself between the ball and the defender. I just think there's multiple ways to get him involved. He's not a one-trick pony, so I'll take the over. I think he gets in the end zone.
Not too much more I can add on that, Tommy. So I'll just quote our recruiting guy, Hank South, Adonai, the touchdown guy. I'm going over as well. Absolutely think there's no reason to think that he won't find the end zone. You take a look at his history, as Chip mentioned, in the college football playoff. And again, just some of the matchups in my mind, I think favor Texas, especially with the struggles that this Washington secondary's had. I think there's a lot to be accounted for with a guy like Xavier Worthy and, JT Sanders. It should open up an opportunity for AD to find the end zone.
Well, Eric, you took the Adonai the touchdown guy line from me, so I'll just say, if you are ever looking for a 20-plus minute rant, ask Jeff about the goal line fade in football. All right, our next line, 1.5 sacks of Michael Penix. Can the Longhorns defense get this done? I debated this one for a while because I don't really think they need the sacks per se in this game. I just think they need to get home enough to make him uncomfortable. That said, I still think they can get at least 2, so I'm going over here, fellas.
Yeah, I'm going over. I'm going over on this. The way that T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, the way these guys have been men on mission, I think they're going to, if they don't, get to Michael Penix themselves, they'll collapse the pocket and create opportunity for Barron Sorrell and Ethan Burke. So I'm going to say over 1.5 sacks of Michael Penix.
Yeah, I mean, this is a defense that's averaging almost 2.5 per game this year. So to me, that's an easy over to take. But when we talk about getting pressure in Penix's face, you know what you're going to get from that interior D-line group. I think the interesting thing for me in this game, the chess match that I'm really watching. I know you look at Sark in that Texas offense against the Washington defense, but to me, it's Pete Kwiatkowski. How he schemes and what he dials up against this Washington offense, because this offensive line won the Joe Moore Award. We know Michael Penix is one of the better quarterbacks in the country. But at the same time, Texas can't play a static defense. They can't play a static front and static coverages and expect to win this game. Washington's pass game is too good. They can pick you apart. And plus your second-level defenders, Anthony Hill, Maurice Blackwell, Ryan Watts at corner, Janae Barron at the star position. Those are some of your better blitzers. So PK's going to have to take chances at some point to try to get the Penix with an extra body. When does he do it? How does he do it? Situationally, what does that look like? That's the matchup that I'm fascinated to see, because at some point, yeah, we can talk all we want about getting pressure with the front four, but you've got to at some point throw something different at Penix just to try to get a free rusher at him.
Tommy, one of the best things about following both Chip and Jeff is I don't have to give much analysis. I can just tap into my humor. So I'm just going to go with T'Vondre Sweat's line, right? When T'Vondre was referenced that, hey, Washington won the Joe Moore Award, T'Vondre said, no, we got awards too. Not really being phased at the fact that he's facing what was declared the nation's best offensive line. I say all that to say I'm going over. All jokes aside, to piggyback off what the guy said, this is a Texas team that's had 4 and 5 sacks in a game multiple times this year. I don't see any reason why they won't be able to get home, just based on the fact that, listen, no disrespect to the Washington offensive line, but, I took a look at their center, and the kid is standing about, 275 pounds. It's going to be a busy day at the office when you got 360-something pounds of T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy coming at you on the inside. I don't see any reason why that won't open up opportunities for guys to get home and sack Michael Penix more than 1.5 times. So I'm going over.
Well, and that's another, Eric brings up a good point. Does Texas put T'Vondre Sweat head up on Parker Brailsford with that 100-pound advantage and just, try to shove him back into the pocket? Because Parker Brailsford is really athletic, and that's kind of Washington's offensive line. They're athletic. They can move. They can roll the pocket. They can, they'll waggle Penix. They're, clearly going to do things to try to tire out T'Vondre Sweat or keep Penix away from T'Vondre Sweat. Does Texas go head up on Parker Brailsford?
And I'll add real quick on that. When we talk about Sweat and Murphy, this defensive tackle group is deep. And going back to what Eric said, I think if Kalen DeBoer is going to break tendency, I do think tempo is one way he can do it. And I would at least try again, because like Eric pointed out, Texas has struggled against tempo this year. It's going to be real critical for Bo Davis and for PK when they substitute defensive tackles to try to make sure you've got a pairing on the field where at least one of Sweat or Murphy is on the field. So you've really got to figure out what groups do you like best. Is it, an Alfred Collins, Byron Murphy pairing? Is it Sweat and Collins? Is it Sweat and Broughton? Is it Broughton and Murphy? Like you really got to figure it out. How does Jere Bledsoe factor into that? Because you're going to need to go deeper into your rotation to make sure you've got fresh bodies for crunch time. So again, that's how close this game is to me, that I'm focused on defensive tackle substitution patterns, is trying to find what's going to give one of these teams the difference.
Well, Jeff, and rightfully so. It's one of those, this battle really, and we've talked about it all week, how essentially this is where your game is won. So Bo Davis and Ryan Grubb on the other side, Kalen DeBoer, going to have to do everything they can to try and get an advantage in such a well-entrenched group on both sides of the offensive and defensive line for Washington and Texas. So we'll have to watch a lot of interesting things in that matchup come Monday. Going back to quarterback talk now, our next line, and we've got just 2 more, including this one. Half an interception, over or under, for Michael Penix. He had one last year in the Alamo Bowl against Texas, although that means nothing. He's thrown 9 this year. I'm going over here. I think this Texas defense has improved so much in the turnover department from a year ago to now that they can at least get one on Penix. And, we've talked a lot about how this week they've said in media day and in press conferences that they're going to play aggressive. They're going to play tighter coverage. So I think they can find a way to pick off Penix at least one time on one of those 50-50 balls. Guys, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think they get him once. So I'm gonna go over on this. Penix has an interception in each of his last 2 games, and if the Texas pressure is on point, I think Texas gets 1 interception of Michael Penix. So I'll go over.
Yeah, my only concern is the safety group for Texas with Derek Williams out for the first half. That group has a chance to be the group that swings this game one way or the other, because Michael Taft, Jared Thompson, those guys can make a play that keeps you in the game, or that maybe gets you to the point where when you get Derek Williams back, maybe you're playing with a lead to start the second half. Or that group could get you in a 14-point hole, or if you're Sark, maybe you've got to scrap this game plan that you put so much thought and effort into and just say, you know what, we've kind of got to go to the air and let Quinn grip it and rip it so we can keep pace with this Washington offense. So I'm with Chip. I think when you look at Washington and what they've done this year, Penix, he'll put balls in positions where you can make a play. You're going to have opportunities to get interceptions. And I think when we talk about the deep ball too, which is most of the time where you're going to have a chance to make something happen, you go back and look at last year. I mean, Penix is one of this game last year. I thought PK actually had a really good plan. They completed a 35-yard flea flicker on the first play of the game. They didn't hit another deep ball the rest of the game. Penix was 0 for his last 9 on passes of 20 yards or more down the field. So when he's throwing it deep, you're gonna have a chance to contest the ball and maybe maybe force a turnover. This safety group has got to be on point. They just can't be a detriment to the cause. They've got to at least make it a level playing field, especially by the time you get Derek Williams back in the second half.
Tommy, I'm legit torn on this one because take a look at Michael Penix's numbers. He only has 4 passes have been batted down this year and doesn't get a lot of his passes tipped, right? Because when you have great receivers like Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk and others, you know, they're able to make plays and not really out of position. In my mind, you take a look at some of the interceptions that Texas has had this year, or just maybe the formula you would think to reach that mark. It's a tip pass, or, you know, someone gets batted up in the air or something of that nature. You don't quite see that, right? And to piggyback off Jeff's point, this safety room is not having Derek Williams Jr. That's something that's crucial. But at the end of the day, the reason I'm going to go over is I just think, quite frankly, you know, Washington's going to be in a position in which they're going to have to be passing the ball nearly exclusively, I would say, in the second half to keep pace with Texas in this game. And you talk about a quarterback in Penix who is 14th in the nation in yards per attempt. Over 9. They push the ball downfield, especially considering the fact that, in my opinion, they're going to be fighting from behind, having to push the ball downfield. There's an opportunity for that classic Michael Taft interception, or even a Keaton Crawford interception, or somewhere down the line. I think they'll get one. So I'm going over.
All right, and that kind of leads into, you mentioned maybe exclusively going to the pass in the second half. Then I have a feeling how you're going to predict this last line that we've got here. Washington over or under 80.5 rushing yards in this game. Texas's defense is giving up just under 80.5 on average this season. I have no reason to believe that Washington is going to get more than that because nobody has been able to run on Texas this year. Sure, teams have had success overall, but you know, I'm just not convinced by it. I think Dylan Johnson's had a great year for Washington. He's come on at the end of the season, but they haven't played a defense like Texas's against the run. So I'm going under here, fellas. What are your thoughts?
You know what? I'm going to go over on this. I don't think it'll be much more than 80 yards, but I could see, you know, Ryan Grubb turned down Nick Saban to be his offensive coordinator because he's one of the best in the business. And so I'm going to give Ryan Grubb and Dylan Johnson the benefit of the doubt here. Again, I don't think it's much over 80 yards rushing, but I'm going to go over and say that Washington does exceed 80 yards rushing.
I'm actually with Chip. I'm also going to go over, not by much, but there was something Jeff Choate pointed out at Media Day that really kind of got me thinking. He said this Washington offensive line is so athletic, probably the best offensive line Texas has gone against in terms of their ability to quickly climb to the second level. Look, I'd like to think Kalen DeBoer and this offensive staff for Washington, they're smart enough to realize you're not going to run the football at Texas. I mean, if Alabama couldn't do it, if nobody else that Texas has played this year could do it, you're not going to be able to do it at this point. They're just too good on the inside. But you can attack. There are points in this defense where you can attack Texas and your edge play. You know, Jalen Ford and Devondre Sweat, a lot of those guys have said, hey, Barron Sorrell doesn't get enough credit for how good of a run defense we are. Barron Sorrell needs to be on his A game. Ethan Burke has to be a guy that can't get washed down. He's got to really hold the edge. But I do think Washington, look, this offensive line won the Joe Moore Award for a reason. This running game has been productive this year. So at the end of the day, I think they're going to get theirs. But if they're going to get theirs, they're going to have to be smart and hit it on the edge and hit quick hitters and get behind that quick offensive line. Because I'm telling you right now, if their plan is to play Texas in a phone booth, number one, I don't know why they would do that. But number two, if they do, that's the go with God plan where you're just praying and hoping that what you do is going to be different than what Alabama and Texas Tech and what everybody else has played Texas has done this year.
Tommy, the reason I'm going under has really nothing to do with Washington's offensive line or maybe the capabilities of those guys. It has everything to do with Washington's secondary. I think that's going to fail them. I think that's going to force the Huskies to be in a position where they're going to have to throw the run out of the window. Everything Jeff said and Chip said as well is very accurate, but in specificity with the athleticism of the offensive line, it's something that was talked about. Even some of the guys who covered the Huskies talked about, listen, you know, yes, these guys are light, but, you know, they do like to pull and they like to get those guys on the edge and find ways to get those backs out there in space. But with that being said, I don't see a way in my mind. If this is a game that I see in the second half, Washington having to throw their way back into, or at least to keep pace with Texas, I don't see a way that they can eclipse that 80-yard mark or come near to it in the first half enough to eclipse that number. So I'm going under. Again, not having anything to do with the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line as much as I think Washington's secondary fails them, and they're in a position where they're having to throw to keep pace with Horns.
Well, I really like this Horns 24/7 quad box. That was a lot of fun. So I appreciate you guys making the time. And we'll still see you all throughout the week. Make sure you head to horns247.com. There's no better place to get coverage on the Sugar Bowl come Monday. We've still got some more stuff coming up on Sunday before game day. So again, make sure you stick around. And here on the YouTube channel, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you're the first to know when new content heads your way. We've got plenty of it coming up this week. Thanks again, all of you, for being here. And we'll see you next time.